On today's episode of the Lost and Found podcast, I had an amazing conversation with Justin Lovato, who just showed up in such a beautiful and authentic way with a loving, open heart. And I feel like he was such an amazing example for men that can show up to the world in a very conscious way, that have a powerful physical stature, but also a tender, gentle, loving energy with an open heart. And for me, just by having the conversation and absorbing some of his energy, it really highlighted some of the traits in myself that I want to lean into more, that I've been feeling recently, and was just really highlighted by Justin. And I feel so grateful for being able to have the conversation with him and just kind of absorb and share that energy. I think he's doing great things in the world, and I think you'll really enjoy being a part of this conversation. Now, before we jump into the podcast, I just want to let you know about the Lost and Found Conscious community that I've created. It's a free Facebook group that I wanted to make for like-minded people to be able to show up in a honest and authentic way, to share what's coming up for them. And if you're also on a journey from being lost to found, and you want to find like-minded people to be able to explore that with and have conversations, I know that sometimes it's not easy to find people on that same journey. So I wanted to create that group for people to be able to join and find their tribe. So if that calls out to you, then if you click the link in the description or the show notes on the podcast, you'll be able to access that for free. So with that being said, let's jump into an uninterrupted podcast with Justin Lovato. Justin, thanks so much for joining us for the just the second episode of the Lost and Found podcast. It was actually Zach Blakely, our first guest, who suggested that I reach out. And when I checked out your content, I resonated. I loved how authentic you came across on all of your content, and I've been really looking forward to the conversation. So thanks again, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to this, and it's cool that you're just getting started on the podcast, and this is your second one.
Yeah, it's actually, I felt called to do this for a long time, and this is actually, it feels like quite an important part of my journey in stepping into who I feel I actually am. And for the majority of my life, I felt a big resistance to feeling like it was okay to just show up authentically as me. And I've wanted to do it for such a long time, but had so much self-doubt, or kind of, oh, would anyone listen to me? Would anybody want to? All that internal chatter. And it was towards the back end of last year. I was thinking about it. And then I had 3 different people in 2 days say to me, hey, have you thought about doing a podcast? And at that point, I was like, all right, let's do this. Let's just do it and let's see what happens.
Yeah, I love that. Very cool. Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, man. So there's so much that I would like to talk about, and really just get insight on you as a person and how you got to where you are on your path now. Because I think the types of people that will be watching this may feel as though they are, a lot of people I speak to struggle to find a tribe and a community of people that are on a path of high consciousness, or a spiritual path, or a path of wanting to just show up as the best versions of who they are. So with that in mind, I'd really like to find out kind of what put you on the path that you're on now. And if there's a big, long, beautiful backstory, I absolutely welcome it.
I think a big part of my quote unquote path was still very unconscious for quite a long time, as we kind of go through self-discovery. And there's a big part of me for a long time that was becoming more conscious and becoming more mindful, but was still very much unconscious in the development of that phase into who I am now. So it was a very organic approach. I think I've always been a very present person and was always an individual that always led with my heart intuitively more than the mind. And I would have to say that I was mostly unaware until probably the age 29 or even 30 before I used psychedelics for the first time. And when I did psychedelics for the first time, I didn't have an awakening of any sort or even a powerful awareness shift of any sort, but more of an intuitive feeling of just becoming more mindful and more aware of how I operated in my everyday basis. Mm. And it wasn't like a big message or a big sign. It was just I found myself randomly recycling more the next day. Or just being aware of my consumption with food or the way that I went about getting my food. Some stuff like that, small things like that. And that was kind of like my unraveling of discovering who I am for quite a long time. It was like this organic approach, just small little things, little changes. Each time I ever did the plant medicine, or, you know, when I became quiet and still within myself, a form of meditation, it allowed me to essentially just become more and more mindful and more conscious of how I was essentially dealing in energy on an everyday basis. I wasn't using terms like that either. It was just something that I was doing for quite a while before I actually became fully aware, I would say, enlightened, if you will. And it's been a beautiful, really organic journey for myself in all of this. And I mean, I can get pretty into that backstory if you like, on how I've kind of got into it. I mean, a lot of it was mostly plant medicine. Into this discovery, like I mentioned, I first started dabbling with magic mushrooms and found myself more aware. And then I found myself a couple of years later indulging in DMT. And DMT was a big shift in who I am, but it also introduced me to the quantum in many ways, and entities and spirit. It was the first time I had essentially an encounter with a full being, not necessarily introducing me to love, but showing me, and this was pretty profound, I would say. My first DMT trip, it was me becoming nothing, becoming nobody, and then before I realized there was this beautiful female essence, this entity right next to me, and she acknowledges me, and then she starts to fill me up with love, and powerful. It's incredibly powerful. And then she fills me up, and then she stops, and then she acknowledges that I know this love. And I let her know that, yes, I am aware of this love. And then she filled me up more and more and more, to the point where you feel like you can't be any fuller. And she stops again, and she acknowledges that I know this love as well. And I said yes, and I felt very good about that. I felt really proud and full, and knowing that I had this tremendous amounts of love for myself at that time and in my life. And she acknowledges that, and but at the same time, she let me know that most people have no idea what that love feels like. And it was interesting because I had no awareness of that. I had such a level of presence, but also such a level of lack of awareness. And I'm in my own little loving, happy world, per se. Not very aware of how most people truly are suffering, or how they don't know this love. And in that first ceremony, she let me know. And I did feel bad for a moment. And she said right away, don't feel bad, but go out there and show them. And I was like, okay. I didn't know what that meant at the time. And I don't think I knew what that meant for the next 5 years. But that was a big shift for me in understanding that a lot of people didn't know this love that I knew. And in somehow, in some way, I was supposed to help them find it.
That's amazing, man. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. So a couple of things I want to ask about that. And I've had experiences with plant medicines too, so I'd like to, share those shortly. But when you said you took mushrooms for the first time, and it wasn't like an awakening, but instead it was just some subtle shifts that want to recycle or think about the, where your food came from. What do you think was happening there?
Probably a level of awareness, I would say. I always tell people the way I operate is very much like a puppy. I am a very, very present person, very much in the moment. The best way to describe how I operate is that I can travel to a country, I can climb 3 mountains in that country, I can go to the same coffee shop every day. And but I couldn't tell you the town that I stayed in, the coffee shop that I went to, or the 3 names of the mountains that I climbed, but I was incredibly present while I was there. Like I was there, I was the mountain. If I had a conversation with the person, they had my full attention. But then everything else kind of gets a little
So almost like
foggy.
100% right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's how I still operate quite a bit. I'm working on the awareness part because it definitely serves its purpose. I think there needs to be a balance. But I live in such a high level of presence. And that first mushroom trip, I would say it kind of started introducing me to that awareness of just being a little bit more mindful of how I went about my day. I'm a big advocate. One of my biggest things that I personally work on is conscious consumerism, which requires a level of awareness for sure. And that's one of the things that makes the most sense for me too on this spiritual journey is understanding my energy transactions and how I deal in energy and what are the intentions of whatever it is that I am consuming or purchasing or supporting. And that has kind of like been something that's continued growth for me. And yeah, like that first mushroom experience was just that, like becoming more mindful of my consumption, whether it was plastics or, picking up trash on the ground, or even not only where my food came from, but how much I was consuming, because I was in the bodybuilding before. And that was a big shift. I felt very like it was gluttony almost, it was all for the self. And I realized there's so many forks in the road, so many that we're not even aware of due to lack of awareness. I realized I just want to become aware of all the forks. And then that way I can choose service to others over service to self and then make true change. And yeah, that was kind of like the beginning of it. But it was a very organic approach. It wasn't like a true mission or thought. It was just kind of happening quite naturally, which is pretty magical. I really enjoyed that process of it. And nobody was really doing that type of work in my collective at the time or community. And I'm not a big research person. I don't really look into things, or for a long time I really didn't read about things. So even when I was getting into mushrooms, I wasn't looking into what it was about, the history, in any way. And the same thing with DMT. So again, a very, very present organic approach. Like the first time I smoked DMT, it was in my bedroom with the volcano. I like the first 50 times I smoked DMT was by myself with a volcano. And the same thing with mushrooms. I always shamaned myself. I just didn't know to look even into it or where it would be available. It's just one of those things that I lacked awareness in for sure.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes.
That's pretty wild.
Yes. It's very funny. Mm-hmm.
So my first experience of having any state altering substance outside of alcohol was at 28, and it was ayahuasca.
Mm.
So that was the first thing that I hadn't smoked weed at that point. I'd not done mushrooms. I hadn't done anything again outside of alcohol. So that was interesting. And I'd had awareness of it. So that was approaching 7 years ago. And I had awareness of it for quite some time before then, because people within my network had done ayahuasca maybe 4 years previously. I'd heard about it, and it actually just didn't call to me whatsoever. And the same way that drugs had never called to me, actually. I grew up doing martial arts from 12 years old. It was the one sport that I really excelled at. I wasn't never into team sports. I wasn't an athletic person by any means necessary. And then martial arts, I remember my first session, I was just throwing like head height round kicks with power just naturally. And my coach said, like, "Oh, how long have you been training?" I said, "This is my first time doing it." And he was like, "No way." I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "I don't believe you." I was like, "No, really, it is." And I just seemed to really excel. And I started actually assisting coaching in the classes at 14. At 16, over here in the UK, you can finish school at 16. And I was teaching 23 classes a week when I was 16.
Wow, yeah.
And I just my life was just martial arts, training, discipline, focus, and a lot of the ethos that goes with martial arts. I got into bodybuilding myself when I was around 20. I competed when I was 23. And I just always kind of thought that drugs were for losers.
I had that same point of view.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
And I never wanted to do them because I just had this very kind of focused mindset and path of where I wanted to go, what I wanted to be. And I heard about ayahuasca, and my opinion was like, nope, not for me. And then over time, I started to feel like a little itch. And it started to it got bigger and bigger and bigger until I got to the point one day where I thought, I've got to do this. And it's so interesting. It sounds like such a cliche because it says that she calls you when you're ready.
Yeah.
And it really was that. It got to the point where I felt like I have to do this. And yeah, life was never really the same after.
Yeah, right. I think once you put the universe glasses on, there's no going back. Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
So I was the same way. I really wasn't into any type of drug. I was an athlete all the way through my years. And before the mushrooms, I first got into marijuana, but it was only maybe around age 28. And the only reason why I did that is because an athlete talked about how it helped him with focus, actually, and even like reading comprehension. Now, it didn't work for me in any way like that whatsoever. It actually, for short-term memory, doesn't serve me very well. But it was something that I did use and helped tremendously with connecting to my person in such a powerful way, through yoga, through training. Smoking and training became something that I was really into and passionate about. I even had the hashtag light and lift when I was going through all of that, when I was one of the few bodybuilders that was doing it at the time. And I just found such a beautiful connection with my person during moments of physical fitness and physical activity. And yeah, so like I feel like the next step was the mushrooms, but it wasn't even on my radar, to be honest. It was a client of mine that was like, "Hey, have you ever tried mushrooms?" I'm like, "No." Like, "You should try mushrooms and watch the sunset." And I'm like, "Okay." And that's what I did. I just took a bunch of mushrooms and watched the sunset. So, and it was the same friend 2 years later. He's like, "You ever tried DMT?" I go, "No, never heard of it." He's like, "You should try DMT." I'm like, "Well, how should I take it?" And he's like, "You have the volcano?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Just put it on the volcano and smoke it." I'm like, "Okay." And yeah, so those are the way I experienced those first profound medicines, for sure.
What went through your mind after the DMT trip? If you hadn't heard of it, hadn't really researched it, and your friend just said, "Hey, stick it on the volcano, give it a blast.
Yeah,
What went on when you came around from your trip?
that's a great question. And it was funny because I even asked him like, "What's it like?" And he's like, "Well, you love mushrooms." I'm like, "Yes." He's like, "It's a lot like mushrooms, but you get there in like 2 seconds. It's
Times a
like your
million.
highest, yeah, it's like your highest level of mushrooms that you've ever done. So like a hero dose." And I'm like, "Okay." And then he goes, "But it only lasts for 7 to 10 minutes." And I'm like, "Okay." I'm like, "Oh, it's short." And he's like, "Yeah, it's really short, but blast off is fast. Then you come back." He's like, "It's really powerful." And so since he said it was just like mushrooms, that's all I really needed. I had a beautiful relationship with mushrooms. I was connecting and growing such beautiful ways with myself, with my partner, with the earth. It was very motherly as well.
Mm.
And at the time, I didn't have any idea of spirit world either. And even when it happened, even though it was the really first time like there was a full blown entity, a supernatural event, I still didn't like become curious of like what that was. It was really strange. It was just like, yeah, this happened, and like it was really fascinating. And then I really did think about it a few different times because I did smoke DMT a few different times after that, and like some powerful entities would come down and say what's up. And then I was like, well, what are these things? What are these things coming down? I was like really curious. And so at the time, I didn't believe in source or the universe or energy. I just didn't even have a thought on it. So I thought like maybe these were our other humans meditating at a very high level, and they're in this space. They're in like this frequency. And when I'm doing DMT, I'm entering into this space, this frequency.
Mm.
And that's what it is. And that kind of makes sense, in a way. And so that's how I thought of it. I didn't really, again, look into it as much. I didn't really tie into it much or make it a thing, which was really kind of neat because I think a lot of times we get caught up in trying to make things a thing
Mm.
and dissect it and overanalyze it and evaluate it and even judge it. And I just didn't do any of those things. Um, I didn't really understand or become fully enlightened until so probably 5 years later after even smoking DMT many times. It was more so I understood that whatever it was that I was doing, I was getting downloads, if you will. I was having original thoughts. I was tapping into something. And every time that I was meditating through plant medicine or becoming very still through different levels of meditation, because I wasn't doing breath work yet, but just different modalities like yoga or the cold, or training, I would get these epiphanies. I would get these ideas on how to be more love, on how to be more conscious. And so that became something that I loved doing. Like I was trying to figure out ways, and I didn't realize at the time it was presence. That's
Mm.
what I was seeking, was these deep levels of presence for a portal to open up for consciousness to flow through.
Mm.
And I didn't realize that's what I was doing unconsciously for quite a while. But I really liked looking back now and seeing how that kind of was. It was such an organic flow. There wasn't any outside factors. There was no like before knowledge on reading any of these things and like implanting any distortions or seeds on like what it should be like or what I should be experiencing. It was such a beautiful way, I think, for me to like come into this work. And what really came out of it and how I came into what I do, long story short, is I became really curious of why people were suffering. That's something that really started to fascinate me because I didn't suffer. And just from that first story I mentioned, I knew this love on a very, very deep level, on a
Mm.
cosmic level, on an infinite level. I was aware of it, and I felt it, and I knew that was me. And I became really curious of why most people didn't have that.
Mm.
And I realized the reason why I did know this love is because the way I exist in such a level of presence.
Interesting. And
Yes.
now, is that something that you naturally just
Yes.
lean into from, is it something you can always remember?
Yeah, it's just from my childhood. And I grew up in a really, really abusive household.
Hmm.
And I didn't take on any family trauma, any
Wow.
generational trauma because of my extreme presence, which means that I was able to have more empathy, more forgiveness, more understanding, more acceptance, just naturally, unconsciously as a child. So
That's
anytime that,
fascinating.
yeah, exactly. So I became really interested about that. Like, why do people hold on to the trauma? Why it gets passed down? And it's all due to just level of presence. Eventually, we are no longer in the presence when we're in the state of fear all the time. And yeah, it is really fascinating. And I remember even the times when my stepdad would abuse me. I had empathy and love for him, forgiveness. I also understood at a really young age that it had nothing to do with me, which is also very rare. Most children would think it's them, that they are unlovable, they are unworthy, they are not enough. Those thoughts did not enter. It wasn't the same for my older sister, my brother, and my younger sister. They had a really tough time.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I became really curious about why I didn't carry on the trauma, why I don't suffer from unworthy or intrusive thoughts, why I'm not anxious about the unknown or uncertainty. And it's because I live in such a level of presence. And I became really curious of how can I help other people tap into this level of presence. And so when I first started kind of getting into this work, I was kind of just able to articulate whatever it was I was downloading. That's one of the things I feel I do really well, is explain my experience, explain whatever message comes through, if you will, and articulate that in a very palatable way, for people to, whoa, okay, I've never heard it that way, or, oh, okay, I see it. And so that became kind of like my channel for a little bit. But I realized, and I think more so the particular time that I was doing it, I was more so maybe telling people as opposed to sharing. Still learning at that time.
Mm.
And I felt resistance with people, with trying to kind of almost infringe on their journey without realizing it. And so I was like, wow, so like how can I teach this in a different way? And I realized if I can teach them stillness, then I don't have to say anything, because then presence, consciousness will do the work. The
Yeah.
the epiphany happens to them, right? Like as it happened to me. So I found the breath, and I started leading meditations, and that's kind of how it unraveled. And now I use my words, and while they're doing the meditation, to get things going and to have them remember who they are.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's all through the stillness. And so that's what I do, is I teach stillness with conscious conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's a few things that I want to ask surrounding that. So, one of the things, have you managed to come to any type of reasoning as to why you were able to have that presence and not
Mm.
carry that trauma, whereas your siblings, they did? Have you kind of got to any, reasoning as to why you
I
didn't
don't,
experience?
you know, I truly don't know. Um, to be honest, I feel like I've always leaned, into this this higher self, if you will, naturally, even as a child. And it's funny. I was going through, and I wonder if this even like lines up with what you're asking, but it might. I remember I was going through my separation with my previous wife of 8 years, and I didn't really know how to mourn properly. I never had to experience such a mourning process, because it
Mm.
feels like a death.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And then finally, it was funny. It's like I took the time to, like, all right, I need to sit with this, because it kept coming up in unique ways. And I'm like, this is interesting. I need to learn how to sit with this. So I sat with it, and I had a beautiful out of body experience. And I was watching my person being angry, frustrated, upset, really going through it, crying, snot everywhere. It was really good stuff. And he was angry for a moment. This person was angry and frustrated, and then almost wanted to become mad at the universe, if you will. like be mad at it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, almost like fuck this type of thing. And then I had this unique. It's like I went to two places at once. I went to this part of me, and I never remembered this. It was really wild. I remember this time. It like I was in both places, and all of a sudden I was a child again in my bedroom, and I think I just got the shit kicked out of me by my dad. And I remember the child was going through the same emotions as this adult Justin was going through, with the frustrations and the anger, and the child did the same thing. It was like cursing the universe. It was really interesting, and I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't even remember this, but I remember this now clear as day. It was like this frustrated child and this frustrated, and then at the same time they're cursing simultaneously the universe. But then right then it was like, it's like, but it was like, why do I have to go through this or something? Or I was even asking like where are you, almost. And at the same time the child was answered and this adult self was answered, and he's like, what do you mean? Like, look who you have. And it was my higher self watching the child. It was my higher self watching Justin. And it's like, you've had him the entire time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't know if that really lines up, but I feel like that might in some ways.
Mm.
You know, I've always had like, yeah, this loving awareness that's right outside all the time, leading me, guiding me, allowing me to be this present person, this present child. I really do go through life intuitively in such a unique way. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned the stillness that you get people to access. That's one of the things that you help facilitate, is entering the stillness.
Mm.
And it's interesting because that's actually become a part of my practice very recently, where I've always been a very deep thinker. Maybe I was a philosopher in a past life. It would actually make a lot of sense. And from a young age as well, you know, I mean, I started listening to things like Deepak Chopra when I was 14,
Amazing.
which is probably unusual for the average 14.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But it just resonated listening to the Quantum Soup and Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer was actually the first person that I started listening to when I was 14. And I've just always been fascinated by that and just picking up information and wanting to hold wisdom. And I remember being 18 years old and having conversations with people in their mid 40s where they would almost like turn their head sideways, like confused by the things that I was coming out with. Even at school, I remember, I think I was maybe 15, and I remember I was in a science lesson, and the teacher was maybe fresh out of university. She was quite young. And I spoke to the person next to me, not in a disruptive way, just kind of quietly. And she started shouting at me. And I just said, Miss, are you shouting because you're frustrated because you can't explain how you feel calmly? And of course, that really pissed her off. So she started shouting even more. And I just kind of like, just paid attention and said, like, I mean, you're shouting more, but I think it just makes you more wrong. and then she kept going, and then I said, and you know, at this point, I think I was making a point, and I said, are you not embarrassed that you're the adult and you can't control your emotions, and I'm the child and I'm speaking calmly? And at which point she actually left the room because she couldn't handle it anymore. And really, she got frustrated because there was truth in it. And you know, at this point, I'm just being a smart 15-year-old. But from a very young age, I had awareness of human dynamics, behavior, why people do what they do. I could see, like, it was obvious to me, this is just, you can't, you know, tell me how you feel calmly. You know,
I didn't have that until much later, the awareness. You know, I mentioned I exist in such a level of presence, but there is a lack of awareness because of that true, like, focused presence. And that's something that I didn't really actually obtain until I started that was really what's cool about the downloads. It actually got me thinking for the first time. Because before I was just being, I was in the pure beingness, like all the way up until 29 years old. And so when I started getting these just channels of information, I was like, oh, I never thought of it this way. And then I'd regurgitate it to my partner at the time or to friends, and then I couldn't shut it off. It was like, it was nonstop. It was nonstop. And then I was just like, just regurgitating and word vomiting and thinking and talking. And it was the first time I was actually getting in my mind.
Right.
Which was really fascinating. Yeah, because I was just like, I was just becoming aware of everything, all of it, the world, energy, everything all at once, but still not reading about it. So it's like, even that was like a very unique way of learning of the world without looking into things. And it sounds absolutely ridiculous when I say it out loud, but I really didn't even start reading until like 2.5 years ago. So everything that I learned was through the quantum, was through the downloads. And then when I started reading Joe Dispenza, when I started reading Eckhart and all these other great, brilliant minds, I was like, oh, they're talking about the language that I'm talking about. And I finally like, oh, okay, like I'm not crazy. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. And it spoke to my truth. It aligned with my truth. And that really helps, because I realized there's a whole world. That's what got me like realize, oh, there's a whole world out there that's doing this. There's a whole world that's already doing this work, and it's been around forever. And then that was really nice, because I felt really isolated for a while, for about, I would say 6 to 7 years, like very much. Yeah, because I wasn't looking.
And that almost loops right back to what I said at the very beginning. There's a lot of people that may be watching this that almost do feel that isolation, where it's, I don't have my tribe. I was fortunate that growing up in the martial arts, that martial arts school promoted self-development, personal growth. So a lot of my closest friends now, I grew up doing martial arts with. We were all into it throughout our teen years, which was quite unusual, but one of the things I'm so grateful for. And it's interesting you say about you had a lot of presence, but didn't develop the awareness till later years. I think I was the absolute opposite. I had immense amounts of awareness, even from a young age. I remember being 5 years old at school and noticing things that I could just tell other people weren't aware of. And I can remember exact situations where
a great skill. It's a good skill.
Yeah, and it would be a feeling that I would get in my body. That's either something was going to happen, something was going to go off. I could just sense, like, hyper vigilant. And the presence took me a lot longer. And probably one of the things that I still work on most now, but that has brought me, going back to what I mentioned about stillness, what I've noticed now is, rather than going to my mind where there's a lot of things happening in my mind, a lot. But if I actually empty my mind and ask out loud to God, and not the God that's been popularized by religion, but
my apologies.
No worries. We'll jump back in.
You were saying about the dogmatic God.
Yeah, so not the dogmatic God that has been popularized by religion, but actual God. And if anyone's watching this that might not understand the difference between the two, maybe we'll get there. And that's quite a big subject, and a thing that I think anyone that doesn't believe in God, it's because they are only aware of the man in the sky with the beard looking over us, casting judgment, and which has kind of been this notion that has been created. But when I ask actual God, I find if I then just sit in that stillness, the most profound answer will arise, not from my mind. I almost feel it in my body.
From within.
Yeah. And it's not that different to an ayahuasca journey, with sometimes the profundity and the clarity. I did it just this morning, where there was several questions that I had. I asked out loud, and I just stayed in the stillness. And the answer that came up was just the absolute answer that I needed.
Mm.
And one that made me feel incredibly settled. And I almost felt the truth. I just felt the truth of it. And having been someone that has been a thinker and a lover of wisdom, that, I guess the philosophia, which, the love of wisdom, the kind of original etymology of philosophy, is something I've always had, that love of wisdom. But to get out of that and to enter into that stillness and into that presence, and to feel an answer arise from a different place that almost doesn't feel like it's mine,
Mm.
is so powerful.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And you can tap into that every day. And eventually you can tap into it all day if you exist in such a level of presence in your car, doing mid yoga. It's absolutely fascinating. And the more that you align yourself through your behaviors in your everyday, adventures, the less distortions those messages will come through. When we still sit with fear, insecurities, unworthiness in many ways, it's kind of hard to hear the message, but it's also hard to hear it in its truth.
Mm.
Yeah. And so that's what's beautiful about getting into this work. Not only will allow you to open that portal for loving awareness, consciousness to come through, it will also allow you to zoom out, so to speak, and become aware of a lot of our autopilot, habitual, unconscious behaviors that are actually causing a lot of suffering.
Mm.
And that's where the real work is at, is becoming aware of those behaviors, becoming aware of our ignorances. And then, and if we can make those changes, then we create a new world. That's really how it works. It's like we are the creators. It's almost a mirror of who we are. We attract in some way. So the higher the more love that we can become through our behaviors, our choices, those forks in the road, then true change actually happens. It just has to start by first getting quiet. Becoming aware is the first big step. And then, there's lots of ways of getting still, but I feel like the breath is, outside of plant medicine, is probably the most profound thing that we can get into. And plant medicine, it's beautiful because if you kind of simplify it in its most basic way, I would say it's just levels of presence. Yeah, it's just all the presence. Like even with microdosing, you take a little bit, and people always ask, like, what a microdosing do? Just a little bit more present.
Mm.
Just for you to maybe just see things a little bit differently. You'll be more at peace. You'll be more zen. And maybe you'll just like feel something. Like all of a sudden a station that you used to listen to on the radio, you just, it doesn't feel the same anymore. You might change it to something else. And maybe you change it to conscious music or music that was made with loving intentions. Or maybe when you're a little bit more present after your meditation, you go to the same like food space that you usually go to, but for whatever reason, it just feels a little bit different. It doesn't feel right anymore. It's like, I want to try something new. And you find yourself picking something more healthy or regenerative even. And you start feeling these energies. And, I did that with my furniture. As I mentioned, conscious consumerism was probably my fun thing that I like to really focus on. It's like, I really started paying attention to the products or companies that I support. What are their intentions? Are they actually loving intentions with whatever it is that they're making? And when I purchase that with my energy, with my money, with my love, what is that coming back? What is going to be in my home? What is it made from? And that's been really powerful for me. From my coffee table to my bookshelves to my clothes, I know where it's made from, who made it, and the intentions behind it. And that fills my soul, that fills my home. I believe a lot of people actually are mostly anxious and restless due to the fact that we unconsciously consume a lot of things, whether it's food, music, TV, furniture, clothes. And a lot of times we're just kind of buying without realizing that the intentions behind these products or these businesses aren't for love. They're for profit. They're for self. And that's a big one. I think that's a big one, like a lot of us can be better about, and really make those strides. It's hard though. I think a lot of the reasons why we buy what we buy is also the way that we cope due to our traumas, due to our anxiety. So it's kind of hard to like remove those things and then fill it with something that's more positive and more profound, you know, for us to like choose a better behavior. It's hard with the way the mind works when it's built on reward-based learning, which is fascinating. You know, how do we break these habits? How do we break these habit loops? And you first have to become aware of when you are triggered, and then you have to become aware of the behavior that you're unconsciously choosing, and then you have to become aware of the result or reward of that behavior, and did it really serve you? And it's hard to even like step outside and start mapping that without awareness, without stillness.
I
So
feel
yeah,
like this is something that a lot of people who will listen to this will give them a whole new level of awareness when they consider their purchasing power, and that when they spend their money, they are supporting whatever it is they're giving their money to. And that's amazing. I've never really considered, of course I've considered where things have come from, but not the fact that unconsciously, you know, cause and effect, that when we do spend our money on certain things,
yeah,
we are, if that thing isn't in alignment with integrity and your values and your morals, love,
mm,
then you are perpetuating that
yes,
thing, in which case you're actually becoming the
yes,
creator of it to an
yes,
extent. Wow.
yes, yeah, and that's hard because that's a hard mirror. That's
Shit.
a hard, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a hard mirror. You know, it's funny. It's like I'm kind of hard, and it's not like I judge anybody for doing anything different, but I'm a hard mirror for people.
Mm.
You know, even in relationships, I'm a hard mirror. And I don't have a TV in my house. I do have my tech room and my podcast room, but I don't have a lot of these apps. It's even one of the things that I'm working towards is to fully remove myself from Instagram eventually, just because I know the platform is no good. You know, we have to do things slowly sometimes to separate. It takes time. It's not ever just a cut sever, but there's some things that you can do, you know, like no more using plastic bottles, or you know what I mean. You can get really good about certain things, but other things take a little bit of time to process. But yeah, it's nice seeing it that way, and then you become really in tune, just like how you said. And it's really cool, like how you really can start paying attention, and even like I think another reason why a lot of people are restless and anxious is we're so quickly domesticated from our roots. You know, it's like most of us aren't touching the ground or getting in the sun or eating whole organic foods. Mostly things are processed. Everything is synthetic and simulated and overstimulated. So I think most people are literally disconnected in every way from Gaia, from Earth.
Mm.
I think a lot of people, especially in cities, may have gone months, maybe even years without touching the ground. And it's really interesting. You start thinking about like, why does the human suffer? You know, what is really causing the suffering? Is it the processed food? Is it the energy that we're dealing through the day that's perpetuating? Because I am you, you are me, we are one. You know, and then yeah, never touching the earth, never getting in the sun, intentionally getting in the sun. And things are thrown off, like even like sunglasses. Sunglasses don't allow your body to regulate the pigment to properly tan. So that's why we burn, because we wear sunglasses. So it's cool connecting in these ways, and feeling my person settle as I do it, as I become more aware of it. And I also realized there's a part of me that I can still feel a certain restlessness to me, and I like to always try to see what that's about. And I think a lot of us do come from trauma, and I think a lot of us do have anxiety due to fear plus uncertainty of the unknown. But I think most people are truly just addicted to stimulation and the chase for dopamine, especially these short ones that we're all experiencing through these devices or these likes or these comments or emails or the food. And I think if we can see that most of us have a feeling of restlessness more than maybe an old trauma wound or fear of the unknown, those things are there. But I feel like that restlessness is something that we really don't pay attention to, that withdrawal, that addiction withdrawal. And then we often will create a story from that restlessness, which is really interesting. Like, I'm lonely or I'm not enough. And maybe that did play on something like as a child. Maybe that's why it can go that way. But I think most are just restless whenever they're not stimulated. And it's a withdrawal. And that feeling, they don't know what that is.
Do you think that withdrawal is actually it's not just a withdrawal from the device or the thing that's given them the dopamine release? That's actually highlighting a deeper withdrawal, which is a withdrawal from
Connection.
That deeply within themselves and what they are a part of. Because when you said about the purchasing power, I bet that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, because at that point, you have to actually take responsibility and you have to realize, fuck, I'm not just affecting me. I am connected to everything. And if you realize that by when you spend your pound or your dollar, that doesn't just stop here. It goes out and it supports industry, it supports behavior, it supports suffering. It can suffer the opposite. It can suffer beauty and love and positive things. But I suppose it has to bring awareness to the fact that I am not just this singular me, which a lot of Western philosophy is based on, that we are just individual, the ego. We're, the Andrew Tate model, which is player versus player, win-lose metrics. It makes you realize, there is something outside of me that I am connected to, and my actions affect everything.
They really do. And in fact, they create everything. Like, I think on a really like quantum level, like I noticed if I do my work, if I'm as mindful as I can be, and I do my practices, and I also be as present as I can, be as aware as I can through my modalities, through my meditations, my breath, acts of service. My reality is always shifting. I truly feel my oceans will get better. I see the world changing and becoming a utopia if I can be that within myself, if I can honor it within myself, within my home, within my community, and share that knowledge and really walk the walk. I think there's a lot of us that conceptualize consciousness, but I think truly being is like the full circle of it all. We get so caught up into understanding it and philosophizing it. I mean, I was and still am into that, and oftentimes, and now I'm coming full circle. It's like, it's just about being. It's about being. It's about being right here, being love, having your heart fully open, being aware. And it's beautiful. That's what I've realized more than anything. There's like two choices when anything happens. Does your heart stay open or does your heart close? And now I love moments where it wants to close, because I look at it, I'm like, no, we stay open. It's like, no, stay open. And the only times I do close is if I'm not doing my work, if I'm not doing my meditations, if I'm not doing my breath, if I'm eating processed food, if I'm taking in bullshit, my vibration drops, my consciousness drops. But if I consistently look under the veil that is the universe through stillness, through the present moment, I keep upgrading this beautiful person to be more loving awareness. I didn't really become enlightened, fully enlightened till about 3 years ago when it was funny. It's like I went through this phase where I was the first time ever I judged people. And that happens with spirituality. It's like when you become spiritual, you start seeing things, you start seeing how people aren't showing up. So then you end up judging the people that aren't doing the shit they're supposed to do. It's kind of like a rite of passage, it seems, for all people who start getting into spirituality. And then the ego comes back because it starts judging all these other people that are, they're still on their mission and they're still on their path, rightfully so. And I remember there was like 2 years, and it was more specifically around COVID, where I was just like, I was in this space of judgment, and I was really upset with people and the way they were acting, and I was suffering more than I've ever suffered in my life.
Yeah.
And it was like rotten in me. It was horrible. I was like, what is this? And then as I kept doing my meditations and found the breath, I became aware that I was consciousness, that I was the universe experiencing itself through everything, through everyone, through different levels of awareness.
Consciousness having a Justin experience.
Yeah, through you, through me, through trees, rocks, birds, bees, this space in between, the blackness and outer space, the sun, everything in between. It's just consciousness experiencing itself. And once I realized that I'm judging consciousness, essentially I'm judging God, source,
and yourself.
And myself.
Yeah.
And right then it was just like, it was gone. It was like all of a sudden, all of it left. And I was like, damn. It was like, it was immediately just lifted off me. And then I was like, done with that. Done. All I want to do is love people. I just want to love them exactly where they're at. And then you realize that's how you shift on consciousness to consciousness. It's by love. Like if you judge, we automatically go back to unconsciousness, because loving awareness doesn't judge, it's loving awareness. And so I realized if I really want to help the unconscious who are causing suffering, I should lead by loving example, and I should love them fully as they are, without judgment, without frustration, without any of those things. I
had almost this exact conversation with I say a friend who's like a brother earlier today, where I had the realization that if I have resistance about where somebody else is on their path, I'm resisting my own path. The moment I have any kind of feelings of inner resistance about where they are, thinking that they either should be further along or why aren't they fill in the blank, I'm actually just fully resisting my own path.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And that was beautiful, leading with love. You could just, you're okay with everything. You understand that nothing's personal either. That's really a big shift too, in how people can heal from their trauma. And oftentimes possibly remove the fear of the unknown is seeing it this way. Seeing it is just how it is. And I really think that the duality and the polarity of everything in one is exactly what it's supposed to be. It's how it learns. It's how we have the experiences. If it was already perfect, then there'd be only one. It would already be non-duality.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why there's the dark and the light, the yin and the yang, and
both have to exist.
Both have to exist to gain experience, to gain knowledge, to it's really fascinating. I think it's why the universe is still expanding in its own way. It's through these experiences, through this knowledge. There is no good or bad. There's just is. And I think the mission is to be at peace with it. Just to be at peace with it, whether it's a flat tire, a divorce, or a death. To be at peace with it.
I think whenever, and this is, I will often lose sight of this until, and if I enter into a moment of darkness, and by that I mean just in my inner thoughts, there will be a whisper that will remind me of exactly what you just said. Where, like you said, it could be a flat tire, it could be a separation, a breakup, just something that comes up unexpectedly, where we resist it and we think, for whatever reason, it shouldn't be happening. We think it shouldn't be happening. And I feel like the largest percentage of the suffering that starts to happen is when we have the belief it shouldn't be happening.
The resistance to it,
It's the resistance.
the controlling of it.
Yeah.
That's something that's so powerful, because if you can remove that, right, if you can simply experience life as opposed to identifying with it and trying to hold on and grab it and keep it, you actually experience it in such a more, it's almost overwhelming. I realize this with love and with my relationships and my partners. It's been unbelievably beautiful. It's like, as opposed to resisting the separation or being upset that it's ending, you become so thankful for the gift or the experience that you had within it. And you feel everything. You feel everything. The sadness, the love, it'll bring you to your knees, and you stay open to it. You just stay open. You open your heart to it more and more, and it feels like it literally grows in your chest. And it's amazing what happens with that, the unconditional love, and that's one of the things I always get asked about, how I keep such powerful relationships with my previous wife and with my previous partner, Melly, is because of this, is because of keeping the heart open. And when things end, they don't end. It's just what is. And there's no, it's just what is. It's just chapters, beautiful chapters. And like, I've grown consciously and closer with both of my partners, being able to step into this. And it is hard, because the ego wants to keep it.
Yeah.
The ego's scared of not getting it back. The ego is scared of being alone. And it's like, and you can just turn towards it, open and not close. And fuck, it's awesome. It's hard, but so awesome. And it's something I really love doing now. Whenever it wants, I love the feeling of like this ego that tries to close on things, and I just don't let it. It's really cool.
It's an amazing awareness to have. And I think there's a beautiful lesson in when you do allow it all, when you do experience all of the emotions in their entirety, and you don't try to resist. And it may be sadness, maybe crying, it may be gratitude, it may be the fear of, will I feel this again? But when you allow it all to flow, it doesn't stay. It's that
No.
energy in motion, right? It's
Yeah.
in motion. So it doesn't stagnate and pull you down. You experience it more, but it flows. And then there's like a lightness after,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it really is. And like I said, like it's funny, like perspective is everything too when it comes to these experiences. Like, we can look at the end of a relationship like failure. We can even look at death in a particular way, or we can celebrate. We can be thankful. And that's really powerful. Perspective is something that is everything. It really is everything, the way that we go through this life. And that's something that I really pay attention to. Even my last relationship, when it ended, the ego and the part of me wanted to close. It did want to close. It felt all types of things. And it almost wanted to, like, not want to be in another relationship, like a lot of people go through, or they don't want, they need space from the person. And I saw all those things, and I was like, no, like, no, brother. I'm like, wish them love, send them love, like really send them love, authentically send them love, want them to be happy, even if it's with somebody else.
Yeah.
Send them love, send them love. Yeah. And then you really do. And it's fucking awesome.
And
it's so
of course, when you are sending them love, what you're actually doing also is sending yourself love.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when you're sending it out there, it means that it's already full within. If you have no love to offer them, if you're closing off, I think you're closing off that love from yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's fucking hard. Like it
Yeah.
is hard at times. And I've had to go through this dance with my most recent relationship where it's just been wild and a roller coaster and the most growth I've ever experienced in a relationship. But we're almost like complete opposites, where
Mm-hmm.
we are literally the mirror to say, hey, work to do. And
Yeah.
it's like we would trigger each other so easily, but not in any kind of malevolent way where it's been intentional, where it's almost just the wounds that both of us have just kind of get pressed by the other in their
Yeah.
being, which honestly feels like the universe and God saying, hey, you two, you'd be the perfect partner to
Yes.
help each other heal
Yes.
and bring awareness to these things that are going on.
Yeah. If the
And
ego wasn't there. Yeah.
and honestly, it's hard to put into words, really. I mean, it's interesting because she's had multiple psychic readings that all said that we are soulmates and we were together in multiple past lives. We did ayahuasca together recently. It was my fifth time. It was her first time. But during that journey, I was taken to the spirit realm, which I've experienced in DMT before, but not during ayahuasca.
Mm.
And it took me there for a long time. And I reconnected with my dad in the spirit realm, my grandparents. And I also witnessed myself as spirits in the place in between, like where we go in between incarnations. And I'd had glimpses in DMT, but I was there for a long time. And it was showing me how her soul and mine are connected and tethered. And and this is wild because, and I'll probably speak on this in another podcast in more detail, but I had to come over an addiction that I had through my 20s of the amount of sexual partners that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And that came out of trauma to a degree and the need of validation. And of course, it's also celebrated by society to a degree. If a
Yes. Of
man
course.
can have a lot of partners, then it's almost champions. And I
Mm-hmm.
really fell into that trap where
Yeah.
I was getting celebrated by other men and championed by my friends. And I probably did it to an outrageous degree.
Yeah.
And it almost wasn't on purpose in a weird way. It's like I couldn't help myself. It sounds like for any guy that struggles on dating apps, they'll be thinking I'm a complete prick for saying that I struggled to not sleep with so many women. um,
Yeah.
it's like I couldn't
Well,
help.
we're so over sexualized too, for sure. I mean, the culture itself, the promiscuity, hookup culture. That's something that I was also in my late 20s. I thought I wanted open relationships. I thought I wanted uh, women in my relationship with me and my woman.
Yeah.
Again, just like heavily distorted what we think we want. And the over sexualization of the culture more than ever. And so I think we all went through this, or a lot of men go through this. And with porn's such a powerful thing that distorts so many men
Mm.
and disillusions them. And yeah, it's definitely it can get pretty dark for a lot of guys out there.
Yeah.
And like you said, like seeking validation, and what it is, it's really just a high. We're thinking we're connecting, but it's more of just a high
Yeah.
that we're chasing.
It,
Yeah.
it wasn't until um so looping back slightly, I'd kind of had this life of extreme promiscuity. And I actually, the beautiful lady that I'm speaking of, we met, uh, we matched on a dating app, and within 2 or 3 messages, I just felt this. I need to speak to this woman. I need to
Mm.
speak to her. And I spoke to her on the phone. And that day we spoke for 6 hours on the phone. And she lives 100 miles away. 2 days later, she came to see me, and didn't leave till 3 days later. But, and I've never experienced anything like this. I opened the door and I saw her, and I genuinely felt like I loved her the moment that I saw her. And for me, this was kind of nuts. I was like, what's going on? Like, trying to make sense of what's happening. And 2 days later, and she's laying in bed and she's asleep. And I was just thinking to myself, what is happening? Because I feel like I love this woman, but I don't know her. Like, what is this? What is going on? And an answer actually came up, and I'll see what your take is on this. The answer that came up was, love is not an emotion that we give or that we receive. Being in love is a state in which we can exist, and certain people will see us in a way that can allow us to be our true self. And in that state of being our true self, we are love.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just felt like, oh, this woman sees me in a way which allows me to be me in my fullest. And me in my fullest is love. And I am now being in love. And
Yeah.
that
It's
came
beautiful.
up in that moment, and it just felt true.
Yeah. It's wonderful when there is no judgment. The mind is clear, right? And we're just in that space of beingness, our pure selves, pure consciousness, pure loving awareness. And we can transcend in such beautiful ways in these intricate moments, um, when we kind of become more conscious and start leading in this space. I've had really similar experiences, and I've been able to transcend in this loving space where I'm my most pure, authentic self through so many avenues now, through dance, through hugging, through wrestling with my woman, like literally transcending through just like amazing, through singing. Like it's unbelievable when um, you have the privilege of being with an individual who is fully present, fully operating out of love, and allows you to do the same. That's truly something special. Yeah, and what's beautiful that really just shows that um, we're doing the work because love is an action. Love is an action, like the breath work that we're doing, the becoming conscious and becoming mindful of how we're operating, connecting with our person, holding space, trying to be of service. That allows us to have these beautiful moments because love is truly an action. It's consistent effort.
Yeah, it really is. And something that I've really had to work on and still do, in all honesty, because I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with attachment styles, um, but I have the one that's kind of the most difficult, which is like disorganized attachment style. And I mean, I've really, you know, become way more conscious. So to the degree that I experience it now is far less than what it used to be. But I've always struggled with, and this, I think this was actually tied into the promiscuity. I was always terrified of being seen truly. And I
Mm.
felt like that's something I couldn't almost allow, which prevented me from creating deep, meaningful connections with people, because there was actually the fear of, if they see me, they will reject me.
Mm. Mm.
If they see past the charming, like witty, funny guy that meets them and that is full of confidence and seems like he's got all of his shit together, well, what if they see past that?
Yeah.
what if they see my actual shit? I didn't believe that people could accept me for that. And going
Mm.
back to what I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, that's part of the thing for me, is actually showing up authentically and putting it out for the world.
Yeah.
That's been a big part of my journey of going, this is who I am.
Yeah.
This is who I am.
Yeah, that's some powerful stuff. I think, and again, that allows us, especially as men, to really lead by loving example for other men to follow and do the same. And then when we can really be our true, authentic, vulnerable selves, it really allows women to feel safe enough to be their selves. I think that's one of the biggest things that we're struggling with right now, is that there is no fixing. There's nothing wrong with any of us.
Yeah.
It's just about, are we in a safe space to fully express without judgment, without evaluation, not only from ourselves, but from other people. And if we can start doing this for ourselves and start leading in that way, as you expressed, we can make some powerful changes. And I've been able to see it firsthand within my community, with the women I share space with the women I hold space for, the men I hold space for. If I can be my authentic self, if I can dance freely, if I can laugh as hard as I can, if I can speak with conviction and truth, um, fuck, it's awesome. It's really cool to see how that just, it's contagious in such a powerfully awesome way for everybody else to take hold of. And yeah, it's awesome.
I think one of the beautiful things about it, Justin, as well, is that um, you're a man that has presence, that has physical stature. And that's not always synonymous with someone that's so open to love and being gentle and balances out the masculine with the feminine. And it really feels like that is an example that really is missing. And I think sometimes for other men, to see a man that also has physical strength that could be quite dominant in energy, but instead has a gentle tenderness and a softness and a real love and open heart. I think it's an amazing example, because often the two things don't go hand in hand. In fact, I would say it's very rare.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I actually I get that a lot, and it's actually been really a wonderful tool. Even I've realized that I didn't notice it so much later on, but I realized that um, it serves well in leading by example, and it allows men, that who come from maybe a little bit more of a toxic masculinity, if you will, to kind of become a little interested. And like, oh, this guy who I want to possibly look like, or I see him as a manly figure because of his stature or what he's capable of doing. I'll listen to him. I'll see what he has to say. And I realized that a few years ago, actually, and it's been fun to lean into that. And but I also think that's part of it. Like, the divine masculine is a warrior, and he's a protector, but he's also here to be of service, and he's also here to play, and he's here to dance, and he's here to listen.
Mm.
And it's so important. He's here to have passion, devotion, acceptance, reasoning. Those are a lot of my values as a person: truth and love.
It was actually one of the things that I struggled with in my 20s when I was bodybuilding, and I was heavily into the martial arts then, and I had a skinhead, and people viewed me in a certain way. And especially in my early 20s, because I'd experienced a lot of bullying as a child, I almost went the other way, where if I saw like a group of guys, I would purposely walk through the group hoping one would start a fight so I could fight everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of became known in my circle of the guy that was like, don't fuck with Sab. Like, and if we were out on a night out and there was a guy that was getting confrontational with anyone in my group, I was always ready. So
Yeah.
ready, like that. And it actually became this part of my identity that I felt like I had to uphold, because now everybody saw me that way. And the interesting thing is, truthfully, past the, it was, there was so much like it was fear-based, but also it was like I got to a point where I felt like I just couldn't, if I ever let anyone fuck with me, it would be doing a disservice to me and I couldn't allow it. And the way to deal with that would not be through loving presence and diffusing.
Yeah.
It would be like I would get into fights, and I've never been in a fight where I haven't knocked people out in the first punch or kick. And
Uh,
it was, but actually so not me, because in my essence, even as a young child, I've always been so emotional and loving and giving and caring. And it's actually taken me time to let go. And I know some of my friends that have seen me more recently, if I hadn't seen them for a few months, they will say, you've really softened.
mm.
And I mean, I started softening a while back, but now as I'm really stepping into my true self, I'm all smiles. And when I see a stranger in the gym, it's another guy. Before it'd just be like, nod of the head. Now it's a smile. And how you doing, man? And I might not
Yeah.
know him. And there's something amazing and liberating about actually softening into the person I truly am and not feeling like I've got to be this
Mm.
idea of what masculine is.
Yeah. Well, that, it shows that you have also healed that wound from being bullied. There's a reason why we take on these personalities. There's a reason why you had to become tough. There's a reason why for that, and you almost have to be on edge. It's either fight or flight or freeze
Mm.
for many people, especially if they've been bullied. And that armor we take on, it takes a little bit to be like, wait, I am okay, I am going to be safe. And and I guess I said earlier I didn't carry any traumas from my stepdad, but I remember there was a time, for a brief time, where I was very similar. Like if anybody disrespected me in a certain way, I was like, you know what, let's do it, let's just go outside. Like I was like ready to do it. And I remember seeing that side of me, and it was the same thing, that wasn't who I was. And in fact, even when there was a fight, my goal was always to just wrap them up, because I was a wrestler. So just wrap them up and then get them in a position where they were vulnerable, and then ask if they were done, because I really didn't want to hurt them.
Yeah.
Like there was really this soft side of me, but I also wanted them to respect me. It was definitely like something that I didn't get from my father when I was a kid. So I remember seeing that as I got older. I was like, and I could see it like in the way I, like, even when I drove my car, if someone was aggressive with me, they can provoke me. And I remember like coming to a point in my life being like, dude, this does nothing for you. It does nothing for you. Like if at first it was like I would feel the trigger from someone trying to provoke, and first you almost like follow them home because you want to handle business, and then the next time you just give them the finger back, and then the next time it just like it hits you, but you're like, it's cool, maybe they're having a bad day. You keep getting more conscious and not taking it personally, and then the next time you see them and you be like, that poor guy's probably going through it, and you send them love, and you just get better and better at it.
It's wild because I've not had any type of road rage experience for such a long time, even people giving it towards me. And there's those moments where where it almost like, who's going? And then I look and just like smile, and then they almost return the smile. They're like, oh, come on, then you go. I'm like, oh, cool, thanks.
Yes,
It
it's
is
so
just so,
yeah, it's how it works. It's really how that's one thing I realize, is that that's how we shift unconsciousness. That's how we go from here to here. And it's by being love. It's by not getting provoked. It's not getting provoked. It's not closing. It's not closing. It's always staying open, even when it's the hardest, even when there's just an absolute unconscious person being a menace. If you can lean into love, if you can lean into that space, you can shift these people just with your presence. So yeah, it's something that I love doing. I love shifting with love and being kind, and all those things. It's been really beautiful leaning into that. I've been doing that for a while now, and yeah, it's really powerful stuff.
yeah, it really is. I mean, for me, if I used to get into fights, which actually I never wanted to do, I really never wanted to. And in fact, in those confrontations, you speak of fight, flight, and freeze. My natural urge will be flight
Mm,
naturally, but I had to override that.
for
Where
sure.
when I would get into fights, it was because almost the ego would come up and be like, "No fucking way are you running." And
Mm,
I almost wouldn't want to fight, but I was like, "But I'm going to." And
mm,
I would actually always feel bad. I remember this one time. In fairness, this guy was telling me he was going to stab me, and then he did put his hand behind him. And then at that point, hit him. I knocked him out. He was unconscious before he hit the floor. But even then, I knew a lot of the bouncers in my town, and jogging off because I'm not waiting for the police to come. And I said to one of the bouncers that I know, I was like, "Mate, I've just knocked someone out horribly. Go and check he's okay." See ya. And I would feel bad. And I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
"Can you please make sure that guy's okay?" I didn't want to hit him, but it was like I felt like I couldn't allow certain things because I guess it was the pendulum swinging, and it had to go this way to find balance in the middle.
yeah. It's hard when they hit those wounds. It really is. It's difficult sometimes, and I think that's mostly why most of us fight and why most of us do the things we do. We come from some really wild traumas. Whether it's abuse from parents or bullying's a big one with a lot of my clients. The ones who struggle with unworthiness and ones that are on edge and like also looking to throw down. It comes from bullying. That's a really
Yeah.
big one, or fathers. And yeah, it's just one of those things that I don't think is necessarily bad, but if we become aware of these type of traumas and these wounds, and then work on healing and letting go and forgiving, we can kind of release this energy, this ego, and start leaning into better practices for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, man. One thing I wanted to ask you about as speaking on being a man that is in really the kind of the sacred or the divine masculine, and it's not completely one-sided and skewed. What are you? Yes, and it's a hot topic. What's your take on Andrew Tate?
I don't really follow him too much. I've seen some clips of him. I feel like sometimes he says some really profound shit. Like he sometimes says some good stuff that's like, yeah, that makes sense, with the government, and stuff like that. Like he's nailed that. But I think his idea of also masculinity is also distorted. Like I think he seeks a lot of validation in his persona, his personality, his materials, what he considers success. But that's also the system that we've all been born into. So, and I think when you really are aligned, the way you speak is inviting for many, and and you know, you can tell the way he speaks actually creates a lot of resistance.
Yeah,
And so, I think there's many things he speaks truth on, but then also I think in many ways he's also distorted on how he feels what a man truly is.
mm,
So but I actually don't follow him very much.
yeah,
I don't know much about him as a person, or I just know that he's incredibly wealthy and has a lot of cars. And but that's as much as I actually know about Andrew Tate as a person. But I've heard him say some pretty clever stuff, mostly just about the system, the government, stuff
yeah,
like that, which I can align with in some ways. But the way we maybe go about the system is going to be much different.
yeah.
Like for me, it wouldn't be buying a bunch of cars, right? Like if you're mad at the system, why would you buy from them?
You're literally just being like the biggest pawn on the
Yeah,
chessboard, really, because you're
yeah,
stuck
like
within the paradigm of where the problem exists, right?
yeah,
And this has been my take on Andrew Tate, because a lot of people ask me about what do I think on him. And I think that he's so polarizing because he's actually right within the paradigm of separate self. So if
yeah,
your belief was there's nothing past separate self where we aren't connected to each other, where we aren't connected to the divine, where we're just separate, the things that he's saying within the idea of the matrix and the government is right within that paradigm, but that paradigm isn't the end of the story. I think
Right.
we're actually meant to move through these stages like I, we, all. And it's
Yes.
like he's become the top player in the I section.
Yes.
But that isn't the
Yes.
end of the story. There's the
That's a
we
great way. To-
and there's the all. So
Yeah.
for a lot of people, and that's why I think some people think it's an immature look, not, and I think it is, not in the sense that immature is negative, but as in the actual maturation process of a
Yes.
human. I believe we're going from snake to the crane,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
we're meant to go from ego, the baby that cries to get its needs, the toddler that cries when it doesn't get it wants, to then realizing they have to share, and then, oh, actually, how I behave affects my immediate family, and then my community, and we're meant to transcend through that maturation process. So I feel like what Tate says is right within the system that
Very
we've
well put.
been indoctrinated into within the West. But
Yeah.
that's not the end of the human story. That's where we
Yeah.
go to higher levels of consciousness.
Yes. Yes. That's a great way of explaining it. 100%. Like even with his take on with women and like again with hookup culture and stuff like that. Like I think there's levels of consciousness when it comes to divine masculine where we can recognize that women definitely don't want to be a part of hookup culture for sure at all, and you can start seeing that clear as day. On these dating apps, you can see it clear as day when you go out, and that's one of the things that, like for me, like when I connect with a woman, you know, there has to be intentions for me to make that person my partner,
Mm.
and because that's what she actually wants. Yeah, more than anything, and it just keeps going back to the like how the culture is really over sexualized in
Yeah.
so many ways. Yeah, yeah, it's absolutely wild, but yeah, it's one of the things that I really love honoring more than anything. It's like in many ways I'm honoring myself and my life force, but it's really honoring women in all those ways. Yeah, and it feels good to do that, and it feels nice to be safe for them to just like hang around, and that's not the motive.
Mm.
Yeah.
Here's an idea that I think a lot of people lose sight of. There are so many men currently, I believe, I think there's a big divide between men and women. And there are so many men that have disdain or resentment towards women. And there are so many women that have disdain and resentment towards men. But as men, what we have to realize is 50% of all of our ancestors through all of time have been women.
Mhm.
So from that notion, we're 50% woman. It's like all half of all of our bloodline have been women. So how are we going to hate on women? And
Yeah.
I think it's a great thing for women to realize as well that 50% of their entire bloodline that had to go through everything for us to be here now, well, that was men.
Yeah.
How are we going to hate on the opposite sex when literally half of our bloodline was always the other one?
Yeah. It's exciting where we're heading, I feel, with men doing the work and healing, which will allow women to feel safe to do their healing work as well. It's a very exciting time. I'm really um, elated, to be honest, about what I'm seeing here within my personal community, what I'm seeing here in Texas and other parts. It's amazing the work that people are doing and the way they're showing up. And yeah, I'm just really excited for what's to come for the human race. It's gonna be very interesting
That's
for
amazing.
sure. Yeah.
Last question I'd like to ask you, and it's if there was just one message that you would like to leave for humanity,
Hmm.
what would it be?
Oh man, it's a simple one. Um, get still. That's it. Just get still. There's nothing else that needs to be said. Get still and listen, and then that's all you need to do. That's it.
That's amazing, brother. Where can people find you?
My social media is a pretty good spot to find me. Justin D Lovato over at IG. Email justin.mytwocents@gmail.com is a great place to find me. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. My website is iamnirvana.org. Soon to be nirvanamindandbody.com. Excited for that to be launched soon. Very excited for that. But yeah, you can find me on most social media platforms. So always reach out. I'm here to be of service.
Amazing. Thank you so much, man. And thank you for the way that you show up with the open heart and the love. And I think you're an amazing example for other men. And it was an honor to have a conversation with you, man.
Likewise, this was really fun. My heart is full. So thank you.
Thank you, brother. Much love.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. And I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation as much as I enjoyed being a part of it. And if you've got any thoughts or any questions, anything that came up from listening to the podcast or watching it on YouTube, feel free to leave comments down below on the comment section for YouTube. If you haven't already, please go ahead and like the video and maybe consider subscribing to the channel and maybe even hit that bell notification so every time I drop a video on the channel, you'll get notified. Thanks once again for being here. And if you would like to come and join the Lost and Found Conscious community, just go down into the description. You can find the link there. Also, you can find links to find Justin Lovato on Instagram and his website down below as well. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one.